11 minutes late. Signal failure at Vauxhall. 11 minutes late. Derailment of container truck, Rains Park. 11 minutes late. Seasonal manpower shortages, Clapham Junction. 22 minutes late. Badger ate a junction box at New Malden. 17 minutes late. Water seeping through the cables at Effingham Junction. 22 minutes late. Escaped puma, Chessington North. 11 minutes late. Somebody had stolen the lines at Surbiton. These are just some of the classic excuses that Reginald Iolanthe Perrin brings up as he walks into the office every day after his morning commute from southwest London into central London. For those of you who may not be familiar with the character, Reggie Perrin is a middle-class anti-hero of the 1970s living in Britain who despises the monotony of his life, which involves small talk at breakfast with his wife, a walk to the train station, the commute into London, where he usually shares the carriage with a rather unpleasant passenger who ends up sneezing into his morning newspaper, and he works as a food executive in a company called Sunshine Desserts that produces ice cream. At one point, he writes a letter to the traffic manager at British Rail, which reads, "Dear Sir, every morning my train is 11 minutes late. This is infuriating. This morning I took a later train. This also was 11 minutes late. This also was infuriating. Why don't you retime all your trains to arrive 11 minutes late? Then they would all be on time." The fall and rise of Reginald Perrin is well worth a read and a watch if you get this chance. But the reason I bring this up is because Reggie Perrin's story says something important about the role of rail in society. Railways are the arteries that lead into the beating heart of cities. They enable workers to connect their home and their workplace. They enable mass transit at peak hours. And they are an intrinsic part of urban growth, urban planning, and they directly influence quality of life. On the other hand, it means the efficiency of the railway system is always under intense scrutiny. And who doesn't love to moan about trains being late? For the first time in the Mobility Talks web series by EIT Urban Mobility, we will be taking a deeper look at the way rail transport is integrated into urban mobility, and in particular, the role of urban-suburban rail connectivity in supporting equitable access. To discuss this, I am joined by three speakers: Josephine Macharia, Transport Policy Analyst at the International Transport Forum at the OECD. She is joining us from Paris, France. She will be sharing insights from a study they published recently on rail connectivity, urban expansion, and access. After her presentation, we will then engage in a conversation also then with Maximilian Schoeffer. He's co-founder and CCO at Future Rail. He's joining us from Munich in Germany. And Namita Mehrotra, she is Director of Finance at the National Capital Region Transport Corporation, and she is joining us live from New Delhi in India. So welcome to the three of you. Now, before we get into the content, I also wanted to introduce you to yourselves. You were 155 to register for today's episode from 43 different countries with a solid representation from major railway countries such as Germany and France. And there is also a good balance between the public and the private sector today. So as usual, I hope you'll be bringing your different perspectives to the conversation. To do so, please use the chat and Q&A tab to share your questions, thoughts, and comments, and I'll be then raising those with our speakers. We also have some reactors today who have been selected from the participant list. They will have the possibility to intervene live and interact directly with our speakers. The bottom line is, the Mobility Talks is your web series. The more you engage with speakers and other participants, the more you get out of it. So, with no further ado, let's hear then from Josephine about the recent study on rail by the International Transport Forum at the OECD. So, Josephine, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to present this report from the ITF. My name is Josephine Macharia. I'm a policy analyst at the International Transport Forum at the OECD, and I manage this project, which focuses on how public authorities can navigate the complexities associated with delivering urban suburban rail connections such that they bridge the gap between infrastructure provision and inclusive urban development. I'll briefly present the context of the work and the five main recommendations. So, urban suburban rail has become a central tool for addressing entrenched mobility divides. In many contexts, car oriented urban expansion has produced dispersed, low density settlement patterns that limit access to jobs, education, and essential services. This is especially the case for households that don't have reliable private transport. This spatial form also locks cities into escalating congestion management costs, as well as high emissions from the transport system. High capacity and higher speed rail provides an alternative: fast, predictable, and low emission mobility that can connect metropolitan cores with expanding suburban districts. These rail investments fundamentally reshape regional accessibility, influencing where households settle, how firms distribute jobs, and how cities and regions grow. By linking major employment centers, secondary hubs, and suburban communities through frequent, high capacity services, they reduce travel times and expand the range of feasible commutes, potentially increasing economic participation. This can broaden labor market reach and create more balanced regional opportunities. When delivered with coherent land use and housing policies to encourage compact and human scale urban growth concentrated around stations, rail investments can also reduce car dependence. But without such alignment, new lines may accelerate sprawl, trigger speculation, or reinforce existing spatial inequalities. The long term impacts of investment in these systems depends on how they are planned, governed, and proactive choices about integration into existing services as well as wider spatial and housing strategies. This integration requires coordinated action across multiple jurisdictions and agencies. In many metropolitan regions, responsibilities for transport planning, operations, land use, and infrastructure delivery are split across national, regional, and municipal authorities. When mandates overlap or are poorly defined, it slows down decision making and exposes long term planning processes to political or bureaucratic delays. Lack of institutional alignment also complicates land acquisition and operational integration, which creates uncertainty at the stages of project delivery where timing and clarity matter the most. Clear responsibilities and shared accountability are therefore fundamental for sustaining project momentum. As noted, rail investments can have significant spatial effects, partly driven by the accessibility benefits they provide. These can include escalating land values around stations and increased pressure on low income residents in areas where accessibility improves, not to mention construction related disruptions in established neighborhoods. If such dynamics are left unmanaged, speculation and neighborhood change can outpace protective measures and worsen socio-spatial inequalities. These factors highlight why technical planning alone is not sufficient. Successful delivery requires governance structures that can coordinate across institutional boundaries and spatial safeguards that anticipate and address the potential impacts early on. Integrating transport with land use regulation, community engagement, and housing protections from the outset is essential to ensure that rail investments improve accessibility without generating unintended consequences. So, what can this type of coordination between network design and land use look like? The patterns of density in Paris, which is what's shown on this slide, show how concentrations of residents and jobs influence who benefits the most from new links. When planning is coordinated, high capacity rail can serve both dense urban cores and underserved peripheral areas efficiently, making sure that new connections actually improve accessibility and expand residential location choices rather than reinforcing existing spatial divides. This is provided, of course, that the services are frequent, reliable, and well integrated across modes to encourage their use. Seoul in South Korea provides another example of this principle. Its dense, high frequency, and well integrated rail network demonstrates how this type of coordination can extend accessibility well beyond the core, such that suburbs and exurbs can be connected to major employment hubs. But these gains and the wider accessibility benefits rely on the network design and land use evolving together, which I'll get into a little bit more in the following slides. If these processes are not coordinated and spatial expansion is not constrained, then the rail links can only serve a fraction of their potential users. And importantly, this can result in unbalanced regional development. Our report has 5 main key messages to realize the potential of these rail investments in promoting inclusive growth. So first, clear legal and institutional arrangements are the backbone of timely and predictable project delivery. When mandates are fragmented and overlapping, it slows down decision making and negotiations with stakeholders, such as local governments, transport agencies, and landowners. And these negotiations can tend to stretch over long periods. These delays then accumulate, affecting significant phases of project delivery, such as design approvals and land acquisition. Governance models therefore need to reflect local institutional capacity, political context, and of course, the complexity of the system being delivered. Making sure that each stakeholder has clearly defined roles aligned with their capabilities. In Paris, the Grand Paris Express allocates responsibilities for design, construction, and operations to clearly defined entities and established institutional arrangements. A single delivery authority oversees construction, combined with distinct operational responsibilities for the future running of services. And this creates a structured environment for clear coordination. This clarity is expected to reduce the friction between agencies and support consistent decision making, despite the scale and complexity of this program. Conversely, the current operation of the RER in Paris illustrates the challenges that arise when operational mandates are shared between multiple agencies. So, the overlapping responsibilities between SNCF and RATP have historically complicated tasks such as integrating command centers, harmonizing operating procedures, and even jointly managing stations. Additionally, the differing organizational structures and governance frameworks can make coordination difficult, decision making slower, and operations less efficient. Legal clarity is therefore not just an administrative nice to have. It can influence delivery timelines, risk management, and operational performance. Well-aligned governance structures lay the groundwork for confronting subsequent challenges, such as land acquisition, funding design, and long-term system integration. Without this foundation, even well-planned projects can face avoidable delays. So on the topic of foundational actions for project delivery, is land acquisition, which can create cascading challenges for project delivery. Early access to land determines whether utilities relocation, site preparation, and early works can begin on time. And without this, the project delivery timeline is exposed to risks related to technical design revisions, construction sequencing, and so on. Securing land early is essential for controlling timeline and costs. Land acquisition for higher speed urban and suburban railways is inherently complex. It often crosses jurisdictions and can pass through densely populated or even contested areas. Successful land acquisition depends on a solid legal framework, strategic planning, institutional coordination, timely action, and sustained engagement with affected communities. Beyond compliance with legal norms, clear procedures, public acceptance, and consistency in long-term planning are essential. Design choices can also influence the scale and complexity of land acquisition. Aligning routes along existing transport corridors, limiting surface works, or opting for deeper tunneling can significantly reduce the number of affected properties and minimize disruptions. But these choices, of course, involve trade offs between engineering complexity, cost, and even spatial coverage. That means they require early coordinated assessment between transport and land use authorities and local governments to make sure that the technical feasibility aligns with long-term spatial objectives. When it comes to acquiring land from property owners, transparent communication, timely consultation, and fair compensation can help build trust and prevent conflict from escalating. So, some examples from London, both the Crossrail and the HS1, can illustrate how a negotiation first approach can actually help ease implementation. In these contexts, delivery bodies relied on voluntary agreements wherever possible, and they only used compulsory purchase powers when necessary, and supported affected households through relocation assistance and clear communication of impacts. This emphasis on engagement allowed land acquisition to advance alongside design and procurement, helping to maintain predictable timelines. In contrast, in Seoul, they face challenges with respect to institutional responsibilities, which can be fragmented, and complex subsurface rights, which contribute to prolonged negotiations, especially where deep tunneling passes under private property. Such issues can force iterative design modifications and introduce uncertainty, which can also undermine the progress of the project. Coordinated and transparent land acquisition processes ease the subsequent stages of project delivery, from permitting to procurement and even to construction. Beyond the acquisition of land for project delivery, rail investments also influence the utilization and value of land. Land value capture aims to recover a portion of the uplift in land and property values accrued by private landowners but created through public investments. Land value capture can be used to supplement funding, reinforce compact and transit oriented development, but only when supported by strong legal powers, capable institutions, and a property market that is able to generate recoverable value. Without these preconditions, value capture can actually underperform. And when these tools are introduced late, not integrated into statutory planning, or are disconnected from zoning and development controls, the social and financial potential of land value capture as a mechanism can be limited, and uplift can actually just continue flowing mainly to private landowners. So embedding value capture early in planning, zoning, and financing processes allows governments to recycle part of the accessibility uplift created by new rail links to meet public objectives. Integrating land value capture tools with land use regulation, development rights, strategic release of public land, and long-term funding frameworks ensures that value creation and value recovery evolve together. This is exemplified in the Grand Paris Express, which has specially adapted tax instruments, development charges, and the coordinated release of publicly owned parcels of land around stations, enabling authorities to incorporate value capture directly into both the financial architecture of the project and its broader spatial development strategy. This alignment strengthens fiscal capacity while supporting targeted urban regeneration in station areas. Other systems we reviewed in the report, such as Seoul's GTX, the Riyadh Metro, and the Bay Area Rapid Transit in San Francisco, lacked formalized value capture frameworks, despite clear evidence of value creation. In these contexts, limited legal tools and fragmented governance mean that the uplift that's associated with new accessibility can actually accrue just to private landowners, with minimal reinvestment into the transport system or into measures such as affordable housing. Excuse me. BART in San Francisco has pursued joint development on agency owned land near stations, but these initiatives remain modest in scale and are oriented more towards shaping transit supportive urban forms than towards capturing significant revenue streams. Similar dynamics appear in Seoul and Riyadh, where strong market responses around new stations have not been matched with the mechanisms to channel part of the uplift back into public purposes. These patterns underscore the value that value capture succeeds only when institutional, legal, and market conditions are aligned from the beginning. Without early integration, the opportunity to recover uplift can be lost quickly, and major public investments risk reinforcing spatial inequalities. By improving access to opportunities and influencing land value, major investments in public transport can reshape real estate markets, especially around stations. This can in turn trigger speculation and risk pricing out the exact residents that would benefit the most from improved access. Housing pressures risk turning these accessibility gains into exclusion. And early safeguards and targeted housing instruments are essential to avoid this. Affordable housing quotas, inclusionary zoning, and mandatory social housing provisions can secure long term affordability when implemented early and supported by clear mandates. San Francisco uses land banking and partnerships with community development organizations to preserve sites for permanently affordable housing, removing them from speculative markets. And Paris uses community land trusts and binding social housing requirements to protect tenure security and sustain mixed income neighborhoods near new or upgraded stations. Such tools, when employed early, can help make sure that improved transport access doesn't displace residents or result in rapid rent increases. Although some cities experience limited displacement because they have large areas of undeveloped land that can absorb new development, this doesn't also guarantee equitable outcomes on its own. For example, in Riyadh, the absence of housing protections combined with low density expansion and disconnected station areas weakens the actual access potential for the service for low income residents and groups with constrained mobility options. Mitigating displacement risks therefore requires that spatial planning instruments are aligned with transport investment so that rail infrastructure can deliver broad, sustainable, and socially inclusive benefits. Finally, for improved rail access to translate into inclusive benefits, integrated and aligned land use policies are needed. High capacity rail performs best when employment clusters and higher density residential areas create concentrated and predictable demand. When growth is dispersed or densities fall below thresholds that support frequent rail services, new links can struggle to achieve their intended impact without without enforceable density requirements, coordinated zoning tools, and station area planning frameworks. Major rail projects can unintentionally enable low density expansion, lengthen travel distances, and even dilute the accessibility gains that they're designed to deliver. London's experience with the Elizabeth line illustrates how targeted land use policies can reinforce transport investment. Brownfield redevelopment, opportunity area designations, and clear density expectations in nodes like Canary Wharf helped direct development into compact transit supportive patterns. And this integration helps to make sure that accessibility improvements translate into high public transport use, and also strengthened labor markets and supported the transition towards a more sustainable spatial structure. In Riyadh, where the metro has opened up important mobility opportunities and access to education and employment for groups that were previously constrained by limited transport choices, such as women, the full potential of these gains also relies on walkable station areas, adequate shading and pedestrian networks, and integrated first and last mile connections. These elements remain uneven across the network and limit the extent to which improved mobility can actually translate into broader social inclusion through these investments. Integrated density frameworks, coordinated zoning regulation, and better first and last mile integration can help make sure that rail investments foster inclusive, sustainable, and transit supportive urban development. Without this alignment, even the most ambitious transport projects can risk delivering only partial or uneven benefits. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I'll note that the report is available on the link here, and that this project is part of the ITF Mobility Innovation Hub, which aims to help authorities develop and implement innovative and effective policies in the context of uncertainty and change. And this report also could not have been possible without the work of my colleagues and the co-authors, Anastasia Nicolaidou and Alexandros Dukopoulos. And yeah, you can feel free to reach out with any questions you may have or comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josephine, for taking us through the key messages of the study and some of its highlights. And we see the depth of the impact that rail can have, right, on society, on land value, on housing. So many different things that you've touched upon. I'd like to maybe just follow up on your first key message, but it comes back in many of the others, right, in terms of the legal clarity and the governance behind these projects. Do you see a difference in the way these projects are carried out in states where you would typically have a very high level of centralization and states that are typically much more decentralized, where regions have a very strong role in terms of governance? And as these projects tend to cross borders, at least local or regional borders, are they easier somehow in very centralized states like France, like you mentioned, even if there are some complications even there? But does it tend to be easier in centralized states versus more decentralized states?
Thanks. That's a great question. I would say that it definitely helps to have, at the very least, a coordinated regional authority that is dealing with the transport and land use questions. So in France, we have Île-de-France Mobilité. In London, you have Transport for London. These organizations that actually have cross municipal boundary jurisdiction over transport decisions and in some cases land use decisions. This is really what makes the biggest difference as opposed to the decentralization versus centralization.
Okay, so there are always governance models that can work in regardless of the structures of state. Let's say the other one that I was curious about, because you talk about the impact of rail on on space and on value of land, and I think also about the kind of big infrastructure projects that can happen outside cities, typically with airports, right? And you tend to have when an airport is being built or something like that, people will somehow mobilize to say, well, they're against this, or that you can get opposition to these type of big infrastructure projects. Who are the typical, let's say, opponents to rail infrastructure being developed? I mean, what kind of groups would oppose themselves to that?
Wow, that's a challenging question. I don't know if I can say there are necessarily typical opponents. I guess there is an element of concern from people that live in places that are that tend to be lower density or even more rural. Concerns about how such major infrastructure might change the way their I guess their context looks, but in general, I wouldn't say it's necessarily one type of group or one specific opposition. But if the people delivering the project can clearly communicate the potential benefits of improved access, even to more rural or lower density areas, if they can adequately communicate that, I think that can really help with mitigating some of that kind of opposition. But hopefully, maybe
And
somebody else can address this.
yeah, I mean, we can come back to that one as well, and also on the other side, I'm also wondering, because you talk about how these projects are much bigger than rail in a way, because they have this impact on, for instance, land value and housing. Are these projects more successful then when other kinds of investors in a city are thinking about the longer term impacts of what the rail project could actually deliver? I mean, does it work better when there are a larger group of investors behind it beyond simply just those investing in the infrastructure project itself?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say I think when it's clear that these projects are really part of a coordinated land use and transport framework, then they can be more successful. So, in the Paris example, the Grand Paris Express is really looking at more peripheral connections. So, outside of the urban core, where already there's a lot of historic investment in transport, this is where a lot of the jobs are located, et cetera. A new project such as the Grand Paris Express brings opportunities for more employment outside of the core and better connections between already increasingly dense areas that doesn't require those people to go into the core of Paris and then back out to where they're going. So a project such as this can get a lot of, I guess, involvement or a lot of buy-in from people when it's demonstrably trying to address a need in either improving access or also trying to provide a long-term vision of what the city, the region, the metropolitan area can look like with more even distribution of opportunities.
Yeah. And then one more question also coming from the audience on your presentation. So it's also about the impact that a railway station itself can have. And does your study also analyze the impact of integrating infrastructure for urban last mile logistics at train stations? So the role a train station can have to provide that final logistical step into the city. Did you look at that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that if you look at the Riyadh case study, this is a really good example of where it's really necessary to also think about how people are getting to and from the station. Because if you don't have that first and last mile connectivity, then your rail investment might not reach its potential in terms of ridership and in terms of providing access to people. So in the Riyadh case, they've had to also beef up their bus network very significantly, but also it's really important to think about different ways that people get to the station. So it's not just about buses; it's also about pedestrian access, cycling, any form of mobility that really allows people to get to your station is likely to improve the use of your station and the use of your rail line as a result.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Josephine. And obviously, you stay with us, but we can also then bring on Max and Namita, and we can open then the conversation. I would actually like to start with Max first, and to get a sense, a bit of a reaction as well from you on the study, on what was presented. I'd be really keen to hear from you if there's anything that surprised you in the study, and what is for you the key takeaway from the study, but then also to tell us a little bit about future rail as well. So Max, over to you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. So thank you very much also for the great presentation and the introduction, Jean-Paul. I think this is super exciting. So I'm Max, one of the 3 co-founders at FutureRail, and we are developing the software stack for self-driving trains. So our goal is to make the railway networks more reliable, more frequent, and better connected. The primary issues that we address in the industry is the vast driver shortage that's happening all across the world, and especially the high operational costs. To answer your first questions, if there was anything that I was particularly surprised about, I think maybe you touched base a little bit on this before, but I think is the fact that building new rails does not automatically create fair access. I think that this is probably the one that surprised me the most, because it could be even to the disadvantage of some people living in more low income communities that sometimes even get pushed out when the housing prices increase and so on. So that was definitely a surprising thing for me that I didn't expect. And then maybe one of the most important key takeaways is for me really that rail is only as useful as the ecosystem around it. So speed is not alone in everything. So if our trains, and therefore also like your intro a lot, if the trains are unreliable, right, or poorly integrated with other transport options, then the system can simply not deliver the full social and economic value. And so I think the overall system is only as good as it can get integrated. And then a little bit from the perspective of Future Rail, I think this also just confirms something that is crucial for us and our business model, is that the next big improvement in rail might not be just more tracks, but also better operations. Because only when we have a reliable and automated and intelligently managed rail system is really what makes the existing network more frequent, more predictable, more reliable, and therefore also more attractive than the car. And that's really what we believe creates then access for everyone.
Okay, thanks, Max. And then, the same question then also to Namita. You're also bringing a perspective from India here. So maybe tell us a little bit about your role with the national authority here, and then also what surprised you the most in the study, and what is for you the most important takeaway, Namita.
Good evening, and thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to talk about our project over here, as well as about the study, to comment on the study. I'm a director on the board of National Capital Region Transport Corporation. I handle finance and HR in the company. I'm also the vice chair of the UITP Transport Economics and Finance Committee. Uh, the company, National Capital Region Transport Corporation, is tasked with the first regional rail in India. It's a semi-high speed system, and it covers the National Capital Region around New Delhi. That's the capital city of the country. So the idea is that a radius of 100 kilometers around the capital city should be covered within an hour. So this project of about 82 kilometers from Delhi to tier 2 city called Meerut was sanctioned in 2019 with a targeted time period of 6 years. And so it was to be completed this year, and we have completed it on time and within the scheduled cost of about 3.5 billion US dollars. Uh, the it's The operations have been awarded to the so we hived off the operations to a private operator, and Deutsche Bahn is our operator in the country, in the for the company, and they have already taken on the operations for the last 3 years when we opened our priority sections. So this was section wise opening. So far as the study is concerned, it's extremely interesting, and for me, it's exciting to note that there are quite a few boxes that I could check off. So the first was clear legal arrangements and coordination between agencies. So there is a planning authority for the National Capital Region. That's the National Capital Region Planning Board, and that envisaged that how the various transportation systems in the country would be developed in the future. So they have future master plans. Like right now, they're doing the master plan for 2041. So in the previous master plan, they had envisaged that we should have a regional rail, and where all we should have airports, where all we should develop metros, so which should be the corridors. So a broad planning was done at that level, and a number and this particular company is also a joint venture between the union government and the state governments. So there too we had an MOU initially, where four states of the National Capital Region came together to sign an MOU with the central government, decided on certain basic parameters, and then went on to form the company, where all of them became shareholders, and we executed this particular project. And now we have two more corridors which will probably be sanctioned, so which will add another 230 kilometers in the next 6 years. That's the kind of target that we are looking at. So not only that, for we also started on our transit-oriented development planning. In the particular state that we've done this project in the last 5 years, the TOD policy, so to say, was not really very well evolved. It was not in a form that it could be implemented. So we worked with the state agency to draft a new TOD policy. And now what they have done is that in the city master plans, they have incorporated the stations as TOD, the stations and the depots as TOD nodes. So the entire TOD framework then is available, is accessible to all, in the sense that it is known to all, and they plan accordingly. And they have also brought in instruments for value capture finance. So this is the kind of development that has happened. So I'm quite excited to note that. Apart from that, we also minimize the land acquisition, and wherever possible, we've gone on the median of the road in the elevated framework, so that we don't have to acquire land for that. Through the civil body, we've been able to get the land to construct, and then we hand over the road back to them after the construction. We only requested for land for the stations, so that we could plan well for the circulation area for the stations, and so that was off the roads, and so that would be safe for the passengers to alight or get onto the main roads. So it's I'm quite happy to see that we ticked quite a few boxes on the report. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and you obviously provide a very detailed and specific case study of something that is happening right now, and where things are possible despite being major investments and major infrastructure projects. And at the end there, you touched upon the land value capture. And there's also a question which I might revert to Josephine first, but maybe some of you can also reflect on it. So in the study, Josephine, were there any kind of land value capture funding strategies that you felt were particularly successful in some of the city case studies that you assessed?
Yeah, I think in the 5 cities that we looked at, Paris and London were the most successful examples we had in terms of land value capture. In London, it's the Elizabeth Line or Crossrail example that used land value capture um, to help fund the project. And I think in the end, it was close to 30% of the project's funding actually came from uh, a levy on commercial properties, which was selected in that sense or designed in that way to make sure that it's a little bit more equitable, such that the people that benefit the most from the increased access actually also pay the most, right? The people that get the highest land value uplift for their properties and the best access for customers, for employees, etc., contribute just a little bit more. And I think during my presentation, I made some examples, or I suggested some examples from the Paris context. Again, the really important thing about land value capture is making sure that these mechanisms are introduced early and are integrated into statutory planning processes as much as possible.
Thanks, and this I think goes really to the core of building these projects, and I want to spend a moment just to think about why do these projects come about, what actually drives them, why are they important, and maybe just to have a first reflection. I can go to you, Max. I mean, for you, when these projects are being set up, are we looking at cities and the broader area around cities, thinking about their economic development and locating areas where they want to see economic growth? Or are these projects much more about this kind of accessible, convenient mode of transport that should be made available in the cheapest way possible to citizens? Because obviously, when you look at the nature of these investments, these are two very different strategies and routes and drivers for something like this, with also very different types of return on investment, I would imagine. So what do you think is really the core driver for these infrastructure projects on rail?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think this can be twofolded as well. I think on the second piece of it, where it's really about like the more low key investment and the more regional things. This is especially also where we are trying to play a role and influence these kind of decisions, because we come in and one of the first autonomous train use cases in Europe that we're actually developing right now is actually for the reopening of already abundant lines. So we are trying to keep the infrastructure investments as low as possible to create these accessibility for especially this rural, more regional lines, and also see a great benefit on having more electrified fleets where you don't and have the battery inside the rail vehicle itself, so that the infrastructure investments are kept as low as possible, because then you don't have to build all the catenaries across or above the railway networks. And so it's just easier and simpler. So we are focusing much more on this side of the things. I don't have that many insights on the first use case, because we are really trying to benefit from the existing infrastructure. And then if there's new infrastructure development, focus more on the easy ones, where we don't have to wait 15, 20 years until the access is possible. And yeah, I think that's my take on it.
Mm-hmm. And Nimita, in the example here that you have in New Delhi, what would you say is the key driver that is sort of pushing you to invest in that way in rail infrastructure? Is it rather competitiveness of a territory, or this kind of convenient, cheap access for citizens?
So I think it's not that the primary reason for bringing in this project was I'm not sure whether you're aware, but Delhi is one of the most polluted cities in the world. And it's highly congested, and you also have a floating population coming in every day into the national capital region, making it highly unmanageable and making it really congested. The roads extremely congested. So the idea was to decongest this national capital region uh, by providing this semi high speed connectivity, so which will enable the people to move out of the city and develop and stay in the peri-urban, semi-urban areas in the catchment, so that they also find better living conditions, and they can easily access through the high speed connectivity, because many people, over the weekends go back home and then come back for 5 days to stay within Delhi and then move out. So the idea was that if people can travel within 1 hour from the terminal point, then they spend much more time within the city on the roads if they have to access their areas of work. So that was the prime driver, that we will be able to through this green mode of transport, we will be able to control pollution and also decongest the city. Uh, so far as affordability is so obviously this creates access, it also creates growth, because so the two are not in conflict. Any if you look at it, any investment in infrastructure in India leads to about 2.5 to 3.5 times, has a multiplier effect of that times. So it benefits both ways. It creates access as well as it promotes growth.
So there's clearly a driver here of the potential to, let's say, at least replace the car, and Max also mentioned that in his first statement. But I mean, is it also? I mean, is that one of the main things? So the car, but then also potentially other forms of mobility. I mean, is the idea to kind of replace the car or to replace other forms of mobility? And then how does one think about these projects so that they integrate in the best possible way with other forms of mobility, and that the connections are, the right ones? I mean, surely that will be the full answer. I mean, rail can deliver to some extent on replacing the car, but then it needs to connect with many other forms of mobility. Is that sufficiently taken into account in these infrastructure projects, Max? And how do you make sure that it is?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot to answer this. I mean, the team at FutureRail originally comes primarily from the autonomous driving field for street vehicles, and one of the primary reasons why we founded this company is because we want to contribute from the shift from road to rail, as we always like to say, right? And so the hope is definitely that we can help develop a system that is more frequent, more reliable, and shifts more goods and people from the roads to the rails. There's also, I mean, huge support in the European Union. They set the goal of like double rail kilometers by 2050. It's impossible with the current setup, and so I think it will always be an interplay. Obviously, if a train drives to a region in an, I don't know, for example, for an hourly service, right? Then I tend to take my car, because if I want to leave now, then I just have to wait for probably 50 minutes for the next tram arrives. Other than that, I mean, if I have a 15-minute service, then I can just go to the station and I'll probably leave my car. So I think that like the key transport things for especially commuters or like frequently traveled routes, this can be largely improved with more tracks and a better service. I think this will always be a mix on certain modalities, where, I mean, we also see some, and one of you guys mentioned Deutsche Bahn already. I mean, they're also working on autonomous driving shuttle buses to especially connect them from that last station to the last mile into the small areas. And so I think this will always be an interplay. I mean, I'd love to have car-free cities. I think this is unfortunately impossible in most of the cities, but I think therefore it will always be a mix, and we need to find the right balance on how much we need to push for the rails, and then it also needs to work, because I mean, if the service is not reliable and if I don't get to my appointments on time, then I choose the car for the next time. So I think this will always be an interplay.
Okay, thanks. And we have a reaction from a reactor. So let's bring on our reactor, Alexandre Santa Creux from Île-de-France Mobilité. So do you have a question or a comment, Alexandre?
Hi, Jean-Paul. Thanks for taking my question. Do you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, everybody. So I work at Île-de-France Mobilité, the organization that manages, plans, and funds public transport in the Paris region, 12 million inhabitants. So I am concerned with the risk of a missed opportunity when we deliver a rail upgrade or a new infrastructure in a urban fabric that is low density residential, that is already developed and where actually very few people will be within walking distance of the station. And that happens a lot in the Paris region. So one remark perhaps before the question is that Île-de-France Mobilité has a major program of investment in bicycle parking at every rail station in the region, so that million more people can be within 5-10 minutes from rail and high level of service public transport. And so my question is perhaps primarily for Josephine, if she has seen some examples of good practice around the world to really densify. And I know it was one of your slides, Josephine, to densify the urban fabric around stations. My observation in the Paris region is that often the local population in a low density residential area doesn't necessarily see the benefit of densification. They ask, what's there for me? And local mayors, so at the municipal level, they risk following the population and see no value in densification, and they risk approving zoning regulations that prevent densification. So how do we get away from this deadlock situation?
So in a way, I mean, it's a little bit different, but in a way, it's like the opponents that I was somehow hinting to. In a way, like people who don't necessarily want to live close by stations and not create this kind of density effect around rail. Let's say. I mean, I'm skewing a little bit, but anyway, brilliant. So Josephine, how can one respond to that? What kind of case studies have you seen on that? What can we react to Alexandre's comments?
Thanks very much. I think this is a great question and a great reflection as well on the importance of access to stations in, I guess, lower density areas. I think this pushback on development is definitely more common than not in the examples that we explored. But there are some good examples around the world of where there's at least approaches towards making transit-oriented development the norm. I would say in the Greater Toronto area, which is kind of my hometown, we have examples of development around nodes and corridors really focused on the expansion of rail matching also the densification of corridor areas. So even outside of the bigger cities in smaller cities like Waterloo, you find around the station area, there is at least an increased emphasis on densifying around the public transport system. But I would say, unfortunately, it is definitely more common to find opposition to density. But I think this is why it's so important to have sort of sustained engagement with the local community when it comes to developing these kinds of projects, because you can get their buy-in through communicating well the long-term vision of what this place needs to look like, and how gentle densification can also help the long-term improvement of access to opportunities and even the location of jobs in your smaller communities and things like that, which are all beneficial to the people in the region.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, more generally on this question of population density, I mean, obviously around the stations themselves, but then in how rail infrastructure serves a certain type of population. I mean, is there a density threshold in a way whereby rail becomes less relevant in areas where there's just less people? I mean, I can imagine that in India, this is a massive ally, right? An asset, because there is a very, very high density. But maybe a comment from Namita, because I'm sure there might be still areas where there's a bit less or maybe relatively less population density. So even in the context of India, do you see thresholds where rail might be less relevant if there's less density of population?
Uh, yeah, definitely. I mean, you have all said and done. There is a lot of investment that is required from the government, so there are budgetary allocations involved, and so you have, and rail does involve lumpy investments. So, from that perspective, it's very important to plan according to the population densities and areas which can be well served with maybe buses or those would be planned. So we are there is equal investment on electric buses also, so that to cater to smaller areas of population, or where the rail investments may take some time, so that would be the case. So
Mhm. And Max, I mean, you mentioned like the how you're rehabilitating disaffected tracks. Do you have a maybe a different take as well on this population density question? Can rail
Yeah.
also provide a service to less populated areas?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the key thing is that there's no one size fits all solution, and we apply that to the size of the train itself. So the areas that we are targeting for this reopening or reactivation of lines in this really rural areas, we're talking about like a railway vehicle that fits up to 30 passengers by seating and 80 people in total. So there's a project developed by a company called Lore in France, which is actually, think about it like as a little bit bigger bus on rails. And if you don't have the equation of the driver inside that railway vehicle, then it can be economically viable to like drive these kind of trains more frequent on lines, electrified. So you don't have to have like a train that fits 800 people and a driver that is expensive to go to these rural areas, and then there's just a couple of people hopping into the train, right? And so I think it really depends on the use case, but I clearly believe that, I mean, yeah, for sure, there is a certain threshold, but I guess that the threshold might be lower than what we might think about.
Okay, thanks. And we focus a lot on these sort of peri-urban to urban connections through rail, but there's also obviously the case for rail as connecting peri-urban areas. Not always so easy to justify financially. There is also a question in the audience on this. Is the financial incentive to develop these peri-urban routes less high because it limits the need for passengers then to travel into the city centre? And therefore they're a bit less economically viable, right? These infrastructure projects on peri-urban, and so how do you think one can also increase and improve the peri-urban connections through rail? What are some of the tips or drivers that can help make that happen? I'm not sure who would want to take that one first. Is it Josephine, Max, Namita, whoever wants to jump in?
I can maybe start, and then I'm
Yep.
sure everyone will have reflections. But yeah, I think if you're really thinking about more even development across a region, it is pretty necessary to consider how people can connect between peri-urban areas as opposed to having to go through the urban core. And I think this is kind of one of the key elements of the Grand Paris Express is this peri-urban connection. And it's thinking about how the region as a whole is growing, not just how growth really emanates from the center. Because in a lot of cases, you're getting increased density outside of the core, and you're getting more jobs locating outside of the core, and people also want to live outside of the core. So it's really valuable to connect them in more efficient ways. And I would say this is also probably the case in the Seoul metropolitan region, which has a lot of like satellite communities that are growing outside of the urban core, that connection between these communities is becoming increasingly important.
Mm-hmm. Anyone want to add anything on this one?
So maybe I could just say this, that I don't think that investment in rail in India, at least, we look at it as a return on investment or from the financial perspective. So even the metro rail projects or our project is evaluated on the economic return that it is going to give. So we have thresholds for that. Any project that crosses that particular threshold will be considered for a sanction, and it's not important to look at the financial return. So that's how I think we handle it.
Okay. Thanks. So we've talked a bit about the rationale behind it. I'd also like to start thinking about how we're overcoming some of the hurdles that these kind of infrastructure projects represent. There was, in fact, a poll made by EIT Urban Mobility on their LinkedIn page, asking the question to the community: what is the biggest challenge in improving urban-suburban rail connectivity in European cities? Maybe we can show the results of the poll. And the answers were funding and investment, integrating new tech, urban growth and green mobility, and stakeholder coordination. Can we show the results of the poll in the live stream? Can we show the results? And so the number one result was funding and investment, 38%, followed by stakeholder coordination. Josephine mentioned that a lot, 28%. Urban growth and green mobility, 22%, and integrating new tech came last at 12%. I might start with you, Max, actually. Do you agree with the result here? I mean, you were talking more in a way about how technology, can actually somehow change the way we think about rail infrastructure projects. So do you agree with these results that the biggest challenge is actually funding and investment?
Yeah, I probably agree. Although, I mean, we are definitely coming from the perspective of like integrating new technology, because we want to show that you don't have to create things from scratch. You can also use existing infrastructure and existing projects to make this a more successful use case. So yeah, I mean, I see where this is coming from, 100%. But also the awareness of the new technologies that is available out there is probably also a little bit unknown, especially in the rail and environment. And therefore, we are trying to strongly emphasize that a lot can be done with technology. And I think we also speak about this later a bit. But from that perspective, yeah, I'd love to see this number going up. But I agree that the infrastructure and the investment side of things is the more pressing issue to overcome.
And Namita, what's your experience? Do you agree with the LinkedIn community of EIT Urban Mobility that funding and investment is the biggest challenge?
Yeah, I think it is because, as I said, that these projects are highly capital intensive. But having said that, even if you have funds available, I think in such projects to get them to be delivered on time and to the most important part is risk mitigation. So I feel that that is also in executing the project, the risks, even if you have the funding tied up, and if you're not able to take care of the risks, then it's something that you're not successful at. So I think that's another very big challenge with these projects.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Josephine, what's your take on these results?
Yeah, I mean, I would also agree that funding and investment is probably the primary issue. Yeah, I completely agree with what's already been said. I would also refer maybe the audience to have a look at our report on funding public transport. I think it really gets into some of the challenges of, actually putting together the right funding, the combination of funding sources that can help these important projects be delivered, and what opportunities there are in more efficient project delivery to just reduce the funding need overall. As our colleague Namita mentioned, it's really important to address these issues in terms of project delivery that can also drive up costs when it's not necessary to do so.
Okay, so and we've talked a lot also already in the rationale and the importance of this governance system behind these infrastructure projects. So I think I'd like to take the conversation a little bit further and build on what Namita just mentioned, which is the risk factor and the risk and the mitigation measures that you can put in place. I mean, it's obvious that these projects can take several years. We assume that within those years there could also be various political cycles that may change the political willingness or approach backing an infrastructure project of this nature. And so delays might be possible, and this might be a brake on investments and willingness to develop this kind of project. So I do wonder what kind of mitigation measures can be put in place in case of delays. How does one manage disruption essentially over potentially long periods of time? What kind of issues can you raise so that our audience can also be inspired by that when they're thinking about their own projects? Namita, maybe as you mentioned it, what kind of mitigation measures do you think are important?
Yeah, so I think it's most important to identify the stakeholders at the planning stage itself. Uh, the land that you require, you start working on it much before you actually get into working. So, in our case, for example, when we awarded the packages to the contractors, we had clear land titles, and to say about major land parcels were clearly available to us, so that we did not lose time while during construction, and also avoid claims on account of land not being available. Second is that we should have very clearly identified roles and responsibilities. The agency that is implementing should be independent, should be suitably empowered. That's very important. That they should be able to take decisions once it is agreed to do a project. They should be able to take decisions within themselves. The funding should be tied up in a manner that it is approved, and it is available from the sources. So right from the beginning, it should be clear that how the funds will flow and in what quantum every year, and what will be the waterfall. So say from where will the funds flow first. Then appropriate monitoring mechanism is also very important. So if there are agencies monitoring your work, that helps a lot. I think in our case, even the international funding to the project helped a lot, because they constantly, monitor you. They so that also puts a pressure on the government and on the company that you have to deliver, and you have to. So I feel that these are the things that were very important, and stakeholder management, yes, is extremely crucial.
And so it seems that this kind of body that is somehow independent and carries forward the commitment of several partners is important. Is that the kind of model also, Max, that you recognize that can help sort of mitigate risks and delays?
Again, Jean-Paul, I missed the first part of your question. Can you repeat that?
No, I mean, because obviously Namita is talking about the importance of a sort of a central independent body that can carry forward the commitment of several partners and avoid changes and different orientations later on after contracts have been signed and that kind of thing. I mean, is that kind of governance model the key to try and mitigate risk for these kinds of projects?
No, got it. Yeah, I mean, 100% agree. I think this is crucial. I think this is also what causes the delays and the length of the planning and the execution of it. But I think it's one of the key elements to have like a central kind of like independent unit that controls all of the different stakeholders. Because otherwise, like everybody's running into all different kind of directions. And I think this makes the process slow, but it makes the process valid. And so I think this has to come.
And just to stay with you, because obviously here we're talking about like the bigger investment projects, let's say. What is the, let's say, relative value also of thinking about these rail infrastructure projects as rather small incremental changes to existing infrastructure versus setting new tracks and creating completely new lines and things like that? Is there also a value to incremental change that might keep things a bit easier?
Yeah. No, 100%. Like, and that's exactly what we are tackling. I mean, as said, we are a French, Germany-based startup company with 15 people right now. And if we wait for all the long planned projects to happen, we're probably going to die. And that's why we are a big believer in these incremental things, because we believe that with new technology, you can really, the incremental things might be pretty cool. And so it's not just that it's like smaller, tinier projects that are also slow moving, but we really see that these incremental things can move much quicker and are less expensive. and is therefore, especially for young companies like us, then the more attractive thing to go after, other than like waiting for new lines. Obviously, I mean, if there are big tenders out there, I mean, we're trying to influence also how and what kind of rolling stock is then being used on these lines, so that eventually autonomous trains might become a requirement for some of these tenders. But for now, we really focus on the incremental improvements with technology.
Okay, I'm also wondering how return on investment works for these infrastructure projects on rail. I mean, we've talked a lot about the value of land, and so I understand that there's a kind of a dynamic value that can contribute to the return on investment, because infrastructure projects create value in territories in a spatial area. But then I'm just wondering, what effect does the price of tickets in the end actually have on return on investment? Because that seems to be the basic revenue generation from rail, right? Is the tickets, the use by passengers. So there's obviously all of this, to some extent, indirect land value, but then there's also just simply the price of a ticket. And how much does the price of a ticket weigh in to the overall return on investment in the railway, in rail infrastructure? And if you want to have this kind of inclusive access to rail, do you want to have a relatively low price for your ticket? And how much does that affect return on investment? I'd like to have some thoughts on that as well. I don't know who would like to go first. Maybe Namita, in terms of how you're thinking about it in your project.
Yeah, so in our project, the way we went about determining fares is not by looking at the return on investment, but by looking at, see, this is a public service that we have to provide. And what do we charge for that public service was determined by the competing modes. So, so the the relativity with the other modes that are there, and we could not, and then with the integrating modes also. So, for example, Delhi Metro is already in existence, and if they are through a different alignment, taking the passengers to a particular destination where we are also connecting through so there should be no competition between us. So that was another governing factor. And if there are private chartered buses running, or if there are private vehicles, so how much would a taxi cost per passenger? So we worked out on these various things, and then worked out what should be the ideal fare. We also looked at this, that when Delhi is congested and the value of time over there is much higher than for people, because they lose a lot of time in that area. And when we go to the terminal city, the tier 2 city, that is the other end, that is Meerut, so there also uh, there is severe congestion. So we actually created these two different blocks, and we kind of provided a kind of a premium when somebody enters into that area. So there's a premium. So it's all integrated into the fare structure. People don't get to know that where they're coming into Delhi, so they are being charged a premium or anything. But that's how the fare was kind of principally determined. So that's how I think it's been done. In fact, on the what the first time that we've tried out is that at Meerut, that's the terminal station in 22 kilometers of section running in Meerut. We are also operating a metro system on the same regional train infrastructure. So by just creating some loop lines, so that's how we have done. So there are some metro stations, just metro stations, and there are some RRTS plus metro stations. So there also the fare has been integrated.
So you highlight the public service dimension of rail, but on the other hand, there are all of these investments, and then the question is, obviously, as a public body, I suppose, how do you manage your budget? And you may indeed choose to invest in a very accessible means of transport such as rail and keep the fares low for that reason. Nevertheless, that these are trade-offs, I'm imagining. Josephine, I wonder, is there a sense of how much the fare, like how big the share on the return on investment is characterized by the fare itself versus other types of return on investment that are not specifically linked to the fare?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to consider fare revenues as an important source for long-term sustainable funding for public transport. If you want the systems to continue to operate over time, fair revenue will play a role in that. But as already mentioned by Namita, it's really also important to think about the fact that public transport is a public service, right? So how can you balance your equity and accessibility kind of needs as well as your long-term funding needs? We have a report called Fair's Fair. It came out last year that really digs into this a lot deeper. But one key thing is, first of all, is if you're going to offer lower fares, really target your concessionary fares to people that need it the most. So instead of having blanket concessions, for example, for all people above the age of 65, you might target lower income people above the age of 65. And then you could get more bang for your buck out of, concessionary fares that way. And then another important thing to think about that we outline in that report is the need to jointly optimize fare prices without also road use charges. And I think Namita also already touched on this. So again, very relevant, making sure that you're thinking about how you want people to move in your city and what is the most efficient way for people to move, and that your fare pricing reflects that, but also your pricing of other modes, whether it's parking costs in your city center or tolls, things like that. Jointly optimize those so that you reach sort of your objectives as a public authority in terms of moving people efficiently and sustainably.
Okay, and maybe also a reflection on this from Max.
Yeah. Now, super interesting point, and I think this is kind of like also what we see in the market out there, that like some of the operators they have to run the service, right? Otherwise, like the access is not possible. And where we are coming from is always this question of like capex versus opex, right? So can you charge at the end of the day? Can you charge more for an autonomous train than for a manually driven train? Probably not, right? But what we can do is reduce the operational expenses. And there I only have the numbers for Europe, but in regional train traffic in Europe, which is the first use case that we are actually tackling, 32% of the operational expenses is the driver costs. And this is a huge cost block of your running costs. And here we come in, and our selling proposition to the operator is basically we bring this cost down by 80%. And you can then decide on like if this line is turning profitable or not with the fare and ticket prices. But what we are trying to do is basically give you the opportunity to decrease your operational expenses. And also don't forget, like they all pay penalties if the train is late, if the train is not running, right? Because they need to service the contract. So there's a lot that can happen in the aftermath if you're not running a reliable service. So what I'm saying is like we look at the return on investors together with our customers more from the operational cost side of things rather than the capital expenditures.
And Max, let me stay also on this, because you're referring to how technology can help to think about the developments in rail, both in terms of costs, but also efficiency and connections and various and rehabilitating disaffected lines. Can you just give in your kind of top three, something like that, your key sort of technology toolbox that you think will be reshaping the way we're thinking about rail infrastructure projects moving forwards? We can think about the project planning phase, the implementation of the infrastructure phase, and then the actual kind of implementation of rail travel. What do you think are the key top three technology assets that need to be in the toolbox moving forwards?
Yeah, I mean, number one, I have to mention this is obviously autonomy, right? I think this frees up a lot of resources. There's the study out there from the Deutsche Bahn in Germany that 50% of their train drivers are above the age of 50, meaning set to retire within the next decade. And there's simply not a chance that we can keep up with it, because apparently the job itself is becoming very unattractive and people don't want to do it. So I think autonomy is a key enabler, not to only reduce the drivers that we need. We still need some drivers, but not all of them. But also to make the asset utilization of the drivers just more efficient, right? If you think about it, we always think about, okay, a train driver hops in his train and then he's driving 8 hours his train and then is going home. The reality is that like more than half of their time, they actually spend on idle time, right? Unproductive hours, because a train driver per se does not live next to his train, right? So he's taking another train in the middle of the night to reach the station that he's supposed to take the train, then drives for a couple of hours, lands in the middle of nowhere, and then needs to take another transportation method to go back. And so I think autonomy is one of the key enablers. Then with autonomy comes like a change in how we think about train rides, because you can swap the crew. So why is there a train going from Munich to Berlin and then Berlin to Munich? It's basically that the driver also needs to get back, right? So I think on the scheduling and how you approach different things, you can drive in circles other than just back and forth. And then I think a lot on like the operational side of things, not only on the autonomy side, is really how we more efficiently maintain the infrastructure. And a ton of great companies out there that tackle these kind of problems, that you can do predictive maintenance more easily and see the errors before they occur, and not basically then you have to cut the line and renovate the line for a couple of weeks or even months.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks a lot, Max. Maybe Josephine, your sort of top 3 technologies that you think will have to be in the toolbox moving forward in the various phases of the project.
Oh, wow. I think maybe I'll speak about operations. I think Max really covered the question comprehensively. But I think automated train operation is a huge one, because as you started this presentation talking about reliability issues, it really helps with reliability. It helps with also the potential for higher frequency travel, higher frequency trains, which increases the capacity of the line in general. So that also provides a greater rate of return in terms of how much value you can get out of your asset, as has been mentioned. So I think automated train operation is a pretty key innovation or technology for rail infrastructure.
Okay, so autonomy. What about Namita? What would be your technologies of the future that will shape rail infrastructure projects?
Construction stage. I think what we adopted was that we adopted BIM right from the beginning during the construction stage, and the in the contractors packages it was mandated that they would work on the BIM models. So there was a single BIM model on which all the contractors were supposed to work. Uh, this eliminated any kind of conflict or errors that could creep into the design. And finally, they were also to provide BIM models of the constructed infrastructure, whatever asset, constructed asset, whatever, or the asset that was supplied. Now, from this, we took out the information into the asset management system. So there was seamless transition of information of the asset that was constructed and supplied. So say rolling stock, signaling system, the civil infrastructure, all the details were captured into the asset management system. And now we are doing our maintenance through the asset management system. And now what we are targeting at is, through this asset management system, we are trying to come to predictive maintenance. So through the data that gets generated, we are making efforts to move into predictive maintenance. So this is one thing that we are doing. We are also looking at drones for monitoring our traction system. So we've already implemented it. That if there is any hotspot, or there is any kind of any error that is creeping into the traction system, the drone is able to identify and send messages. Drones are also being used to check intrusion into the. So we've already done a proof of concept on this, that if there is any intrusion, so say somebody is trying to steal a cable on the viaduct, that kind of a thing is happening. Immediately the drone can sense that, fly there, take a picture and send it back to the control. So these kind of technologies we have already started using. So I think this is the kind of future that we are looking at, where you are able to monitor on a real time basis your assets.
Okay, brilliant. So we have like the autonomous vehicle concept applying to rail and making everything a little bit more efficient. And on the other hand, this sort of very automated, intelligent database system that allows you to have a very broad overview of the whole infrastructure and real-time information that allows you to react quickly So that gives, I think, a sense of perspective to our audience. And with that, we wrap up our conversation. So thank you so much, Josephine, for being with us, for your time, preparation of the presentation. It's a lot of work put into these events, so thank you so much. Maximilian and Namita, thank you so much for having shared your insights. We went deep into rail this time, and I think that was a good thing to do. We've never touched upon the topic so far. And special thanks to Namita, because I believe it's something like 9:30 p.m. or something like that in New Delhi. So thank you for having stayed with us this extended time and taken a part of your evening with us. So thanks to the three of you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So there we have it, from Reginald Perrin all the way to a discussion a little bit more in-depth and serious, obviously, on rail infrastructure. But there is something about Reginald Perrin which is absolutely clear, is that something like rail that we all use is something that we all want to talk about, and probably also to some extent moan about, right? And so it just shows how central rail is to our lives. And even if there are changing lifestyles where maybe the idea of the commute is possibly not quite the same as it was in the 1970s. On the other hand, we have ever more densely populated urban areas, and we obviously really need to think about the connection between urban mobility within city centres and how that connects to mobility at large and transport at large, and obviously the link with the suburban area is really, really key. We left also the link in the chat to the study that was presented by Josephine earlier on, so there's a lot of information there, obviously. And this leaves me the word also to wish you then a very happy holiday season, as I am here in my snowstorm. I hope that you have enjoyed our episodes this year, and I'm sure that we will be coming back with more episodes of the Mobility Talks next year. Looking forward to challenging speakers on all sorts of various topics linked to mobility. And thank you to all of you for being part of this conversation, of this series, giving us your comments and your questions. Always happy to see that there's a good active conversation in the chat. So thank you so much. Take care. Have a lovely end of the year and get started 2026 in high spirits. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.